It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, this week, there's been an interesting development with Kim Petras and the release of her album that was shelved after it was leaked, called Problematique. And what's quite interesting as far as this album is concerned is, genre-wise, it's very French house orientated, and coming off Psychedelic Switch by Carly Rae Jepsen, which is also very French house orientated, it sort of puts me in the mindset of people are basically cherry picking what type of music they want to make, and almost like to the niche of the decade, the album or whatever, and saying, I want to do an album that is like 2000s French house, or I would say 90s drum and bass, and you know, like the synthwave stuff, which is more like just 80s pop, and like, you know, Hall & Oates, like, because you hear a lot of the Hall & Oates type stuff. So it's interesting to me that now with the state of like chart music, artists are just basically picking a genre and saying, I'm going to do this genre.
I feel like, because we sort of touched over this with people like Miley Cyrus, trying to say Miley Ray Cyrus.
Oh, what is that? You combining Carly Rae Jepsen and Miley Cyrus together?
Yeah, well, I think I'm getting that Billy Ray Cyrus thing mixed up all into it. Yeah, that's not good. Miley Cyrus, we was talking about this with her albums, her newest albums. But another great example, I think one of the main examples of this I can think of is Kylie Minogue, because she did the disco album, a country album, like a dance album, all like relatively fast, like swapping and changing it, and not like some of them quite subtly go into the genre, and it's like a flavour or like a seasoning, but it's still an album. Whereas I feel like Kylie Minogue's album, she's gone like all in on them when she's done them.
Each of her last few projects has been a specific like genre, like you say, and then Tension's album is just all like 90s and 2000s, like just house and dance music, which in this climate isn't very surprising sometimes, but like you say, it's instead of just writing songs, she's like theming her album projects in like specific genres to say, this is 10, like you say, country inspired songs, here's 10 like disco inspired songs, and here's 10 like house sort of 90s inspired songs.
It is one of those things though where I think it helps the albums sort of stand out by themselves. It stops them from bleeding in and stops people from saying the sound samey. You know, like if they're putting out a lot of music, it's a very immediate way to say, well, I'm not just doing the same thing again and again and again. But is it always a positive thing? I feel like with pop music, it's a lot more celebrated when people do different genres and like run around a bit. But I feel like in like more niche genres, you know, if you have like a really heavy like hardcore band, we're going to do some really light, like, you know, sing-along pop style songs as well, people might be very emphasis on the might, but they may be more like, well, why are you doing that? I don't like that. You know, I came here for the hardcore music because, you know, I suppose you could say with niche genres, there's a reason why people find themselves there, and a lot of the time it's because they're looking for something that is off-kilter and is something different and also something specific. So when an artist pivots really hard, they can shake the people who are there for the genre more than them in a way.
So do you think, like, say take Nickelback, who have a sound, they have like a very defined sound that you associate with their band and with their guitar tone, the vocal style, everything, even down to the way the songs are written. They're sort of, you have an expectation for a band like Nickelback, and they have like delved in disco and stuff with She Keeps Me Up and stuff, but it's still rooted in that sort of Nickelback production, even when they're playing with other genres. If they came out with an entire album that was, say, She Keeps Me Up, do you think Nickelback fans would go for that? You know, I think, just because of the association, they're just expected to do what they do, aren't they?
I think when you're a fan, if you're a really, really big fan of the band, people will go, even if this isn't necessarily what I want to support the band. And, you know, a lot of the time, if you like an artist, you probably like the way they do their songwriting and their overall approach. So I think sometimes, even if they're doing music that's radically different, the actual core musical motifs being used are probably going to be similar to what that artist would do, because that's part of their musical DNA, and that can translate into different genres. But I think if you are a casual or, you know, passive listener who are like, well, I like these songs because they're good songs, but I don't really care about the artist, which I think a lot of people find themselves in this category. And then that's probably going to shake you off. You're probably going to go, well, I'm not really into this, so I won't listen to it.
Yeah, you're meaning like the casual fan who maybe doesn't really understand why an artist would choose to change up their sound, or why they would, you know, like from an industry standpoint, why it would be interesting for them to do that. They're just like, they don't sound the same as they did when they came out. So
yeah, so I don't like them because I listen to them because of this reason.
Yeah, because they sound like they did on the debut album 10 years ago. Yeah, I know what you mean. Obviously, like a lot of people who are really into music, I suppose you listen to it with a different lens because you think that's interesting because they're going for this or they're going for that, and you start to like dissect it in your brain as you're listening.
Yeah,
and like why would they do that? You know?
I also find that whenever an artist, and this always comes to mind when I think about other people's reactions to, say, Linkin Park.
Yeah,
there was always like, since they got this new producer in, Linkin Park like either sucks or they're not the same maybe. And I always think, well, the producer can only do so much. There's no way that band was going nowhere near that direction, and the producer did everything and made sure all the songs were different. If if Linkin Park are going in a different direction, that's, regardless to who the producer is, that's where they was going. So I always find it funny when people blame producers for things. And now I feel like retrospectively, the albums that people sort of clowned on by Linkin Park are almost like their definitive songs, the way they're remembered.
Yeah, I know what you mean in that sense. And also, what else comes into this is like a lot of artists will use songwriters or go to songwriting pools and take songs out. So if we're using that as an example, you can go get somebody else's song that's written completely without you and then just put your spin on it. Effectively like an original cover in a lot of ways. That is an interesting sort of lens on the idea of a band, say, changing the sound, because a band can say, I want to work with this songwriter because I know that they will impart a certain sound on our sound.
And I think that, as well, as you're saying, it's presumptuous to assume that every artist is writing most of their own songs. I mean, it's still a relatively new phenomena in popular music that you sort of write your own songs. I mean, particularly in like certain genres like country, it's sort of like, you want the best songwriter, the best singer, the best guitar player. You're not expected to do everything. It's only people like Taylor Swift who have tried to break that mold.
Yeah, or the Zac Brown band where he keeps his own band.
Yes, so that's the thing. It's like some genres, you're not necessarily listening. It's easy to think when we talk about an artist that they are writing the songs and that their melodic choices are them, but sometimes, as you say, they're not writing a lot of the songs. But you could bring this back to Elvis. What did Elvis have? He had an ear. So even though he didn't write songs typically, or very often, or at all, but I'm sure he did something, but he typically doesn't write his own songs. But he would have his ear, it would prick up and say, well, that's the sort of song I would sing. Or, like he said about Polk Salad Annie, he said, that's the song I feel like I would have wrote.
Yeah, and then this comes into the argument of, even like you say, when people have a sound that they're known for, they always end up gravitating towards those certain things that they like. And so if they're picking like from say songwriters or people to work with. They want to work with people that are like-minded musically, that will do things that they like the sound of, because like you say, everybody is subtly biased to what they like to listen to.
And I think a lot of people don't really know why they like things. It's just you hear things and certain things, like you might be listening to a completely different type of music that you don't typically like, but the melody or drums or something might be making you go, well, I like this, but I don't really listen to this sort of music.
Yeah.
And that might be because, you know, you gravitate towards a certain key or a certain tempo or a certain melodic phrase or device that is used.
Yeah.
You know,
you might find that you like dissonance, and that's why you like classical music, heavy music, punk music. You know, like, and that's you're listening for that dissonance, and that's what makes you like a song. Whereas some people hate dissonance, and they'll want the opposite of.
They want resolve.
They want resolve, and that's. But if you're not clued into that and you don't realise that's what you like as a listener, then, like you say, if a heavy band who typically uses very like atonal riffs, if they do a really melodic song, you're going to say, well, that's poppy, because it sounds poppy to me, because it sounds not
predictable to me or what I would thought. And I always think as well, you know, there's songs that have like this sort of twisted sound to them, that people love to use that word, like twisted or you know, like off kilter or anything melodically, where it's I mean, I don't know how to even describe it. It's almost like something that a swing band might use, say, if you know what I mean. But it can be used more often. I think bands that have done this quite well, obviously, I think Imagine Dragons come to mind. A song like Sucker for Pain is the style of song, or Heathens by 21 Pilots.
I know
this is the sound, the melodic devices used. It would be hard to use them melodic devices in a really, really like open pop song where it was just in, say, C major or something. Like, they're tapping into a modal thing, I feel like, on them sort of things.
Yeah, I know what you're saying when you say take those songs. It's like you can imagine Sucker for Pain as crazy as it is being played by like a 20s swing band, because it's that type of song.
Melodically.
You could easily have, like, say, in a movie, a jazz band could cover that song, like with the swing and with the brass and stuff, like Minnie the Moocher style, and it would work.
And I think, like, another example I would say is, like, this is very applicable with a lot of like Swedish melodic rock and stuff, but Avicii arguably is the same thing. He sort of does very, like, he incorporates a lot of very traditional music into his productions. So even though it's like massive EDM, you could imagine like a folk band sort of singing the melodies and playing the same chords, because that's sort of the derivative that he's come from.
Yeah, and he's sort of leaned into that to a point where he's almost like when he was doing his album True, he was just getting bands to... He was either doing it from a sense that he was finding bands that he liked the sound of to then make into that EDM arrangement, or he was finding people to play in that style for his music to give it that feel. But like you say, because he did that, and that's what he was looking to you know, sort of go direction wise, it means that it works in both genres. It works completely stripped back acoustically, but it also works in like the EDM arrangement.
And a lot of people sort of took inspiration from that, even though in dance music is, you know, I would have said a little bit more it's not as like folk song sounding melodically, you know.
Yeah not as traditional.
It's more genre. Like, he tries to break and defy the mold a lot of the time, does dance music, but that was one case where it sort of felt like it came back. You know, it's not the only case, but it's definitely one that stuck out to me.
Yeah, because the thing with dance music is that it's all about the production more so than the chords used, and that's why they tend to use minor keys but make them sound happy, because of the, like with happy hardcore, it's the instrumentation that's so upbeat. It doesn't really matter if it's traditionally in a minor key. Now, I know people can use major and minor keys and use them like
I think the idea is that songs sound, because in dance sort of production everything's quite cold and clinical a lot of the time anyway, and everything can be sort of perfect as well if the producer desires it to be. Then if you do that all with major chords, like if you're doing like 1 5 6 4, it can sound pretty cheesy.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is that by playing like that deadpan blue steel dance like in minor and making the music a bit like what Swedish House Mafia do, where the music's very sort of serious, it takes itself seriously.
yeah.
That makes it sound less cheesy and more, I would definitely say more timeless in that sense. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
they're trying to make an anthem more so than like you say, when it's all like in major, it starts to just sound like not children's party music.
but it gets a bit jaunty, doesn't it?
Gets a bit
it can get a
jaunty.
bit like, it's hard to describe it. It can get not cool in a way.
Yeah, because like when you think about that sort of style, you know, you think like or some of the dance hits. But go on, what was you going to say?
I was going to say, imagine like On Top of the World by Imagine Dragons as like a deadpan dance song. It would be impossible.
Yeah, it would really struggle.
Because that song is leaning heavily on that, you know, like a jaunty, like happy, like overtly happy
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and those songs just don't work with like that like really lush sound design that has all those, you know, like devices in that makes a song brooding or like anthemic in a different way. Because you can have an anthem that's like a jaunty anthem,
Yeah.
and you can have an anthem that's like you like very stereotypically cool sounding, you know, like play it at the end of a movie, play it in an action scene, that sort of like stereotypical musical cool that you expect. And like you say, Top of the World is, you don't think cool when you hear that song, you think happy.
Think celebration or
Celebration,
happy,
yeah.
It's like a subtle, like mental thing where you know, songs present themselves and there's, you know, I mean, for lack of a better word, a vibe that the song gives off, or an emotion. Like songs are meant to tap into an emotion, and so it's hard to have a song that is melodically one emotion and bring it into another one. It can be done. I think there's some really good remixes out there that can really flip the mood of a song, but it definitely, the more weighted it is, like as like a happy song. I think Top of the World always comes to mind because of the whistling. Like maybe if you start taking the whistling and you start taking the production out of it.
I'm trying to think of any melodically sad songs that have whistling in. It's a tough one because whistling is typically used as like a device.
By Callum Scott.
Oh yeah,
That's the only one I can think of. That's because of thrashing it on radio.
It's one of those things where whistling, stereotypically, you would imagine it in like a very upbeat, jaunty song, used for like a kids' movie.
Civil War by Guns N' Roses
that's pushing the line because it's not in. It's on the start, isn't it?
I would say it's in there. Winds of Change by Scorpions. Now I'm just thinking about whistling and songs.
I'll tell you what, you've actually put a pretty good counter argument into this idea of whistling.
Obviously it depends. In modern times, I feel like whistling is used very, like Moves Like Jagger is another great example.
Yeah.
Like that's where I would imagine it. But I think it used to be used more for ballads, like that cowboy thing.
Yeah, the cowboy theme.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about like westerns and whistling like a
melancholy sort of like you say, walking through the desert is the imagery. Like say when you think Winds of Change by the Scorpions, you just like think dry, sad desert town, you know, Lone Ranger walking through with the whistling in the background.
303 though. 303 with the whistle.
Oh yeah,
it's a song called
Starstruck.
That's definitely,
you see, this
melancholy.
This is another thing, right? When you're thinking about, when you really think about musical devices, like say even like things with whistling, you can immediately start to think, well, what songs have whistling in? And your brain goes, well, that's a whistle, and this is a whistle, and this song comes to mind.
Well, you're right, because whistling is not common. It's not something you would expect to hear in a song. So I suppose what you're saying is, if you choose to go for the whistle in a song, that might be something that gets into people's brains and makes you remember it like an earworm.
Yeah.
But I feel like whistling is one of those devices where it can very much put people off.
Yeah, whistling
Especially
is not,
people who can't whistle.
yeah, whistling
like
is
it.
not something I look for in a song. It's not something that would deter me from a song I like, but sometimes whistling as a device, it can be one of those things. But once again,
Do you know what I would put on par with the whistle?
What?
Saxophone.
Okay, why is that?
Because it's, again, not typically used. It's not a good... You wouldn't expect to hear it in a song.
Yeah.
You know, you don't listen to a song and go, obviously the saxophone solo.
Oh, you mean like it's always a surprise?
It's like, they've chosen, you've got an array of choices, like when recording a song, and I feel like a saxophone is a big choice.
Yeah.
You know, you don't accidentally put a saxophone solo in a song.
But to come back round to where we started, like these are the sort of choices that make people's, like say, careers musically have a sound. So if somebody says, well, I like to throw in a whistle every here and there, or and it gives them a sonic identity. And like you say, bands like the Midnight, they go, we like the saxophone, so we're going to stick with the saxophone. Bruce Springsteen comes to mind when you think rock saxophone, because these are choices they made when like getting the bands together or when starting to record an album. That it's a choice going, like I say, you could do that solo on a guitar, a piano, a harmonica.
Yeah.
Ooh. Same time. But like I say, it's a choice to go, we want a saxophone player and we want to tour with a saxophone player, because they don't need to do that and it actually costs them money. You know, when you think about a tour or something like that, or even a session musician to come in, you know, unless you have a saxophone player as part of the band, which is still a choice on the rest of the band to just hire, unless you've got somebody who's just good at saxophone around you.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, like say, it's these devices that people use. Even if you can sing falsetto, you don't have to. It's a choice.
Yes.
It's a choice you make when writing a song to say, I want this bit to be in falsetto. I want to make it known that I sing with falsetto.
This is a thing that I feel like is very applicable with guitars, though. Like, there's a lot of guitarists out there, like the Maroon 5's guitarist comes to mind, where he can absolutely shred, yet chooses not to. He's one of those players where he goes, well, we need to save the song. This song doesn't need a guitar solo, so there isn't one in there. But, I mean, could you imagine moves like Jagger if he just ripped it right at the end, just absolutely
like
went
he does
for it.
Live,
like he often
a lot
does
of the time
live.
they do like this solo breakdown at the end of the track,
and there's a lot of artists that choose not to go for the cliche guitar solo, and then there's a lot of artists that choose to go for it, and that in itself, you know, I feel like a guitar solo is a lot more common of a device. It's not something, particularly in rock, it's not something that comes as shocking, but I do think it's a lot less common than it was. I think that's a very obvious statement, but it's true.
Yeah, because a lot of bands get away with not having guitar solos full stop.
Yeah.
Or some bands get away with having a guitar moment over a guitar solo, like what you would class as a traditional guitar solo where they're just playing and just improvising.
I feel like on a lot of new pop rock / modern alternative albums, there may be a guitar solo there may be one or two moments for a proper guitar solo where it's like the song sort of pivots and everything is to tee up the guitar solo.
Yeah. And then you have choices made by, say, pop singers or even like hip-hop artists where they go, we're going to put a guitar solo in this song.
Yeah.
And we're going to make a moment of it because maybe in their tour, they don't have a moment like that during the show and they want a moment that they can let the session guitar player flex.
I actually feel like it's become a lot more popular for pop and like you say, rap, hip-hop sort of artists to do guitar solos because, as you say, it's a moment in a show. And live, there's a reason why people like it, but it's not cliche. If you're like a a power pop artist, and then somebody comes and does a ripping solo. It's actually like a shock.
Or like you say, like just a distorted guitar hits so much harder in some of those songs. Like Hit It by Black Eyed Peas.
Yeah.
That guitar, the way it's mixed, and because it's just one stab, probably that they've sampled and then they just keep re-triggering, it hits you because you're not expecting that type of sound in a Latin sort of beat like that.
And I would also say Filthy by Justin Timberlake throws you through a loop, because you're like, what? Why is this
you've got
happening?
this full live band doing like the start of a live show, and then it drops straight into just like a sub bass and a kick drum, basically.
Yeah, and like these really weird FM sort of squelchy tones.
And I feel like even Justin Timberlake's voice on Filthy, for the bit where it's like a live band show,
it's covered in echo.
It's covered in echo, reverb. It's meant to sound like he's on stage, and then it drops straight into like a very intimate, like no effects, just him and like sub bass.
It's a very deliberate, like, subvert your expectations moment. And again, that song, like, out of all of Justin Timberlake's catalogue, I haven't like listened to it all in detail, but that song really surprised me. And I find myself, if I do put any of his stuff on, that's one of the go-to songs, just because it's such a bizarre arrangement, and it's such an unexpected arrangement.
Say if you're putting a playlist on, it's a way to shock somebody who's listening. It's a way to say, you're not expecting this. And I suppose that's why Justin Timberlake probably made it like that, because it's a way where if you put it on radio as like a debut single for him, for his album, it's like a way to get people to talk about it, because you go, well, I wasn't expecting that from Justin Timberlake.
Yeah.
You know, that's interesting. I've not heard anybody do it like that in this sort of context. And, you know, the full song is a bit like a shock factor. You know, you're just not ready for it, I suppose, and nothing can prepare. The way the song starts, and then
you're not prepared
hard
for it.
Pivots into the other, like the B section.
Yeah.
You're not ready for it. Nobody could be prepared and not surprised
on
by
like
the sound
a first
of that
listen.
song.
If it was a reaction video of listening to Filthy by Justin Timberlake, I don't think anybody could pause it after the song changes and say, yeah, I saw that coming.
Or nobody could look at, say like you look at the audio file on like a DJ software, or even like within a computer software, you couldn't look at the audio sample and anticipate such a drastic change just without knowing it was already there, because you're not going to say, well, it's going to go from a massive live band like showing off basically, and then just drop straight into like, I mean, it's not quite dubstep, but it's not far off.
It's like I said, FM squelchy bass.
Squelchy bass, yeah. It's just, well, very electronic, I suppose. For lack of a better word, I'm trying to think about what the bass sounds like, but it's, for lack of a better word, it's just electronic. It's just very drying electronic coming off a very echoey live sort of intro, and I think that's very interesting. And these are the devices that people choose to use, and a lot of the time you can do whatever you want, like particularly when you're like established musician, like say a lot of these people are. You just make that choice. And I suppose songwriting and production and being an artist for a lot of these people is just about making decisions and saying, I am going to do a pop album, I am going to not do a pop album, and that's all it's about.
But these things could be the difference between the artist going, I'm not inspired anymore, I'm going to take a break, I'm going to go out the studio and I might take a year off. A bit like, as Ed Sheeran said, between X and Divide, he was like, I got to go live some life before I write any more songs. Some people feel that way. And then I suppose if you're more in like the creative mindset, it'd be like, well, if I'm writing something, I need something to get me excited. And if you're just stuck in your wheelhouse with your same sounds and the same stuff, using the same melodic devices, you might be like, well, why would I be making this? There's nothing like to inspire. Whereas if you start, and I think this is why people like to do the crate digging and the sampling thing, because you could just drop the needle down and hear something and go, whoa, that's immediately sparked an idea that I wouldn't have done if you had to play it with a piano roll.
And I suppose this comes back to like the age-old saying, if you want to be inspired, listen to things you've not heard.
Yeah.
Do things you've not done. Talk to people you've never met, basically, but like mainly with music. Don't listen to the same stuff you've always listened to, because none of that, even though you're inspired by it, you can't constantly be inspired in different ways by the same thing.
Or my advice would be, if you like a song and then there's a feature on that song, you go, I don't really know who that person is. I'm not that bothered about that person. Maybe if the person you like listening to so much felt like they wanted to work with them, maybe listen through the newest album and see, well, do I feel anything or do I not feel anything? And you might find you like them.
Yeah.
You might find you don't, and then you know.
Yeah. So this has been our roundabout topic on mainly it's just gone into like just the creative process and inspiration and just picking apart what we hear and what we see from songwriters and artists in like a professional capacity and like from a music fan standpoint. You know, do you agree or disagree or embrace the choices that artists make?
Are you a ride or die? You'll get what you're given, or you like no, go back into the studio and try again,
redo the first album again.
That's what I think. There's two types of fans. Some of them are like, send it back,
yeah,
and then some of them are like, and I'll take anything,
yeah. Right. I've been Mark,
and I've been Peter.
Thanks for listening.